I know you're all thinking, 30 years experience in banking, he doesn't look old enough to be able to do that, but there we go. And actually, just linking in with the two speakers, Mark and Chris, I have worked for NatWest and I have worked for RBS, but don't shoot me down, I've escaped to tell the tale. Anyway, delighted to be here and good to see everyone, and thanks to COEO for inviting me. What I'm going to do is to give you a little bit of an insight, as I just move on, a little bit of an insight into the Money Advice Liaison Group. I know there are some of our members in the audience, so I know I don't need to go too deeply with you, but I think most importantly is that I'll talk about the collaboration that we undertake and working together, supporting the lives of people in debt, which is fundamentally what the Money Advice Liaison Group is all about. And I'll give you some practical examples as to how we've actually taken that forward as well. So, why is collaboration so important? I mean, we're all here today to collaborate, to work together, to share ideas, to pick up on new initiatives that are going on, and to try and identify ways in which we can improve how we go about doing our business on a day-to-day basis. And that's really what it's all about. I've highlighted there in terms of our existence, we've been in existence for over 35 years, and we have evolved during that time, and I'll show you a little bit of a plotted history over those 35 years in a moment. But I think the other key thing here is that we've actually taken our membership quite widely. I've been involved with MALG for the last 7 years, and we've actually expanded our membership quite extensively. Initially, it was all about the creditors and the debt advisors, but now we have a very broad church of members, not just banks, debt purchase companies, collection companies, utility organisation. I know United Utilities are here today. But also we've actually moved into some other organisations, such as solicitors who are involved in the litigation relating to debt. So it's a very broad agenda that we've taken forward, now involving a lot of local authorities, housing associations, and expanding that engagement. And with the broadening of that membership, our conversations and the collaboration that goes on is actually widening all the time, and I think that's really exciting for us and hopefully for our members as well to benefit from that. That is our little plotted history of 35 years. And I think the first one's quite interesting. We actually are older than the internet. So that's quite good, really. The internet obviously caught up with us and discovered that we needed to move on. And we had our first region in place, which was MALG Northwest, and now we've expanded that to 8 regions across the UK. So locally, we've got Yorkshire and the Northeast. We've got Midlands, we've got Southeast, Southwest, East Anglia, which is our newest region, and also MALG Scotland and MALG Northern Ireland as well. And all of those groups work independently, but also collaboratively with the whole of the national framework for the Money Advice Liaison Group. And it's really important we get people involved at a local level, but we also get larger organisations such as COEO working with us on a national basis. Some of you may well be aware of oops, a daisy, it is a bit lively, this thing, isn't it? Some of you may have come across the mental health and debt advice form that was created. And actually that was a really key cornerstone for MALG over a number of years. It's now under the ownership and the custodianship of the Money Advice Trust, but we work very closely with them, and that's obviously a key point in our history. Probably the most significant point is that the pandemic symbol, because we had to transition our organisation quite dramatically. Up to that point, we were predicated entirely on face-to-face meetings, such as this, and actually you can't beat coming together, having those conversations over a cup of coffee or a little nibble of lunch and meeting new people and having those conversations. But obviously, when the pandemic hit, that precluded that opportunity, and so we needed to transition very, very quickly to a virtual platform. And in fact, we did move very swiftly when Boris made his announcement on the 23rd of March 2020. We actually launched our first MALG Friday Forum on Friday the 27th, so it literally was that week. And that was arguably a significant landmark in our history, because that really brought people together. Because for those of you who were around in the industry at that time, you'll recall it was sort of, hell, what do we do now? Who do we speak to? You know, the debt advice communities, they were in contact centres, and now there aren't any contact centres, so how do we get hold of them? And I'll give you a practical example of how that worked out towards the end of the presentation. But it was a very important time where we were getting 60, 70, 80 people along every Friday to say, what's going on? How can we work together? I need this. Can you tell me who deals with that? And it was bringing people together and having those conversations. Now, I thought that would have petered out in about 6, 8, 12 weeks. The MALG Friday Forum is still going every fortnight now, today. And that's fantastic, and I think it's testimony to our members and the benefits that they've derived from that forum to bring people together, to collaborate, to discuss issues, bring up topics. We're still getting fresh things that are coming along every other Friday, and it's really valuable. So, making the connections. As I said before, really it was predicated initially around bringing the creditors together with the debt advisors, because historically, and this predates my involvement with MALG, never the twain shall meet. Now, and I think this room is evidence of that you know, there is greater collaboration. People are talking regularly with the debt advice community, and the debt advice community are talking very regularly with the creditors. And that sort of link is really important. And the third big group that we have within our membership are the regulators and government departments as well, because obviously we work closely with the FCA, people like the Cabinet Office, Insolvency Service, etc. So really important part of it. And as I've put there, it's not just about networking. It's about what do you do. It's about listening. It's about sharing information. You know, this event is a great example of that, where there have been some fantastic speakers, some really good discussions, and it's all about collaboration. It's about what are other people doing? Are there some good ideas? Oh, I haven't thought about that. Even if you take one thing away from today, it's been well worth the time and investment to come along. And I think that's very much the way in which we operate our meetings. So, I think the first point I make here about the collection sector has added a challenge of not always being recognisable to the customer. And I think that has changed. That's changed quite considerably. And I think that is now very much part and parcel of the way in which the debt landscape has changed, and the way in which the collections organisations have actually moved on themselves and changed the way in which they operate, which is fantastic. But I think the other thing is about listening, and we actively encourage our members to get involved, to have discussions, but actually it's about listening as well, and it's picking up on little things where you think, there's something in that we need to think about, because if we're going to be working together, we need to change the way in which we work, because actually that will help the way in which the end customer will benefit from the challenge that they're facing. And increasingly, and I don't need to tell you this, they are facing increasing challenges literally week by week, month on month at the moment. So, the pandemic, as I say, was a really, really important point, because there was suddenly a real need to bring people together and to work together collaboratively. And some of the sessions that we had, and you add in this perfect storm of the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, consumer duty, everything is coming together. And increasingly, if I turn the clock back probably 4 or 5 years, there were occasions where we were scratching our heads thinking, so what topic are we going to talk about at the next meeting? Now it's about crumbs. We've got about 15 topics to talk about. How do we prioritize those topics, and how do we actually bring the right speakers together? And I think that's very much how we are operating. We have national meetings and regional meetings, and sometimes there are themes like the cost of living crisis which go right the way through there. But sometimes there are some local issues that are very, very important for people who are in northeastern Yorkshire, which may be very different to how things are in the southwest. And we have to reflect that in what we talk about. But I think the whole thing is about bringing those stakeholders together, trying to work out solutions and ways forward that will ultimately benefit the end user and the customer. So, new solutions. We've actually had some interesting things that have come across over the course of the last few months and years. And I think the cost of living crisis I've spoken about before, but there is a whole new demographic of people coming into debt. And I spoke about this at lunchtime with a couple of people where, historically it tended to be people who were perhaps either unemployed or who were lowly paid and had real struggles. I think there are now people who are coming into debt for the very first time. They've never experienced this before. Some people who have inadvertently overstretched themselves over the course of the last few years. Suddenly, with the changes that the pandemic brought about, they've either been made redundant or they've had a change of career that was necessitated because of the changing landscape. And they suddenly found themselves with some debt challenges, some debt issues that they've never faced before. And increasingly, the debt advice community are dealing with people who are coming to their doors for the very first time, who are struggling, who have identified some challenges that they didn't anticipate, and they're now having to work very closely with them to try and find ways in which they can support them and help them through those difficulties. So I think that's really, really important. And it's been touched on before. Mark spoke at length about consumer duty. That's really, really important, and I don't need to go over that again because I think he's highlighted the whole difference between treating customers fairly and consumer duty and the need to demonstrate the outcomes that derive from that. And I think that's really important within the whole debt landscape. So, we really find that historically there was an element of distrust. People were perhaps a little skeptical about, I'm not really sure whether I should share this information. I think people are going to run off and pinch all our best ideas. But actually, what we found, and again, I'm sure you will find this yourselves, that if you've got some really good ideas, you actually want to tell people about them. And not just that as you share that idea and say, we've done this and we've done that and we've done the other, and this has really benefited our organization and our customers, people go, oh, that's a good idea. I think we could perhaps adapt that and modify that for our organization as well. And of course, you're then a step ahead because you're already on the next idea and you're already thinking about fresh solutions and ways in which things can operate better. And I think there's a great willingness to share information. And even in the 7 years that I've been at the helm of MALG, I've seen that change. When I first came in, I really sensed a degree of, I'm not really sure, I don't really want to share this. This is our little secret, this is what we're doing that gives us the benefit over our competitors. But actually now there's a huge willingness to speak openly and honestly and share information and work collaboratively together. And I think there's culturally, I've seen a real shift and even more markedly over the last 3 years since the pandemic, where I think people are now really appreciating that the importance of collaboration and working together is core to their future. So, Helen, who's just sitting over there, and others who I work with, I talk about working smarter, not harder. And again, going back to Mark's presentation a bit earlier, some of the solutions that he was offering there, to me, are great examples of working smarter and not harder. If you can actually have a bit of fintech that actually helps you to focus on the key parts rather than have to try and crush the entire set of the calls and just focus on those that are most important, that makes a huge difference. And a lot of organizations are thinking in this way. I'm sure you're all challenged in terms of resourcing. We've all seen contraction of organizations where now there are fewer people to deal with far more work than you had, say, 5 years ago. And the only way that you can achieve the goals and the challenges and the targets that you set is about working smarter and not harder. And I think that's something that we talk about a lot, and a lot of organizations are aligning themselves to that. But we make our conversations very informal. We don't record any meetings. We don't do any videos, and we don't sort of produce minutes from meetings, because we want people to talk openly and honestly and share the challenges that they're facing and try and come up with some common solutions. So fundamentally, we are working together to support the lives of people in debt. And I think the graph at or the picture at the bottom, you may not be able to see that word, but that's resilience. And the guy there is Lee Healy, who is the CEO of IncomeMax, who some of you may have come across. And he talked a lot about resilience. And I think, in terms of the way in which the whole sector has moved forward over the last few years, resilience is a key word, and it's a core of what a lot of us are having to deal with. As I say, you can only really do it together. So, a couple of examples that I thought were relevant to share with you today. Going back to when we first started doing the Friday Forum in March 2020, the first 2 or 3 weeks, a lot of creditors were saying, but we don't know how to contact the advisors. We've previously dealt with a contact centre, or we dealt with Fred in X department or Jill in the other department. And the whole sort of, if you turn the clock back 3 years, things were up in the air. There were a lot of change going on. So we responded very, very quickly and set up a creditor email list. And that's still on our website, on the Friday Forum section of our website now. We're constantly still updating it, and it's really to help everybody to make those connections. So if you are struggling to get hold of a utility company or a collections company or whatever, then those details should be available. And that's something that we've had a great take-up on. We know from the traffic going through our website that that's a very, very popular section, and that really is important. We also deal sometimes with niche issues, which I use the word niche quite guardedly, because they probably were niche, but they're becoming more mainstream. And Chris was talking at length about fraud, which was a huge challenge facing everybody. And he highlighted that there is not a photo fit of a fraudster. You can say, oh, right, the fellow over there on table number 4 is a fraudster. I can tell by the way he looks. Exactly the same is true of loan sharks. And there's an increase in the number of people who are being involved there, and quite often they are friends and families of the victims who are subject to illegal money lending. And we work very closely with the illegal money lending team, and they've spoken at length at some of our meetings, and each time you sort of go, crumbs, really, is this going on? And it is. It's quite scary. And one of the collection companies who are members of ours have actually had some direct training and some one-to-one sessions with the team from the illegal money lending team, and that's really helped in terms of increasing their awareness of what goes on and how best to manage it. Another example, which I've not put up there, is increasingly, as things are difficult, people have challenges around some addictions, and particularly in the debt world around gambling. And we work very closely with people like Gamble Aware and GamCare and GamStop and other organisations in that sector. And we had a session at a recent national meeting with PayPlan talking about the work they've been doing with GamCare in a collaborative way to actually work together to support the people who have gambling addictions, who have fallen into problem debt. So I think those are just examples of how the collaboration can work and how it can actually go forward in a practical sense that will hopefully help everybody to be more aware of some of the challenges that are facing people at the moment. So I think that sort of wraps up the main things I wanted to talk about today, but very open to questions. And great to see the catch box back. We used that at our conference last year, a catch box. So
underused.
well, it has. So
Would anyone like to ask a question? We've got some coming up on the screen.
Oh, here we go. Oh, yeah, interesting one. The tsunami of PNPL debt. Again, I was talking with a couple of people at lunchtime about this. My personal view on this subject is I do agree there is a tsunami. I think a lot of people finance Christmas on buy now, pay later terms, and now is the time where they're going, oh my God, I've got to repay this. And that is a huge challenge. And I think I'd just sort of widen that question to share with you sort of insights into the feedback we get from the debt advisors, because obviously at our meetings, whether they're the Friday forum, the regional meetings, the national meetings, we have a good blend of creditors and debt advisors there. And quite often the creditors, including the collection companies, will say to the advisors, are you expecting a tsunami, using that word again, of cases to come through? And the current position is it hasn't happened yet, but I think there is a sense that it will happen at a point in time. I personally don't think there's going to be one massive wave. I think there's going to be a series of large waves that will come through, and arguably BNPL could well be the first of those waves. I think that the timing is sort of rife, and I think there's a real challenge, because many of you will be aware that the financing of the debt advice community is a real challenge. The funding that's available through the Money and Pension Service and other sources provides a real challenge to the debt advice community, a number of whom have had to reduce their numbers just at a time where arguably they need additional resource to face the challenges that are currently coming along. So that's quite an interesting one. What advice would you give to a consumer who's simply unable to repay any amount? What can you offer by way of a solution? Personally, I can't offer them anything, but that's not our role. Our role as a not-for-profit membership organisation is to bring together those members and those organisations to actually look to solve challenges like this. At our conference last November, we had a number of breakout sessions, and the best attended, and the one that people fed back from the feedback survey that was the biggest issue as far as they were concerned was deficit budgets. And effectively that is what you're talking about here, where people do not have enough money to pay their current commitments. And that is a huge challenge. And people like Income Max, who I mentioned before, will work with the debt advice community, because there could well be some benefits and some other sources of income that can be identified for those individuals. But actually it is a real challenge, and that's where the debt advisors work very closely with the creditors to explain the situation, to say, I'm afraid Mr. and Mrs. Smith have a deficit budget. They do not have enough income to be able to pay their outgoings, and they need to try and identify a specific bespoke solution on a case-by-case basis. So I think that perhaps covers that one. Unfortunately, miracles take a little bit longer, and there are some people who are in really difficult positions at the moment. Do you think there will be a misrepresentation of risk once all BNPL is on credit files? They may be managing now, but models will see a spike in borrowing. Yes and yes, I think. I've highlighted my concerns about that particular marketplace. I think there is, quoting the early word, a tsunami, maybe a small wave, maybe a bigger wave, I don't know, coming through on that. So I think that is going to be an issue that will start to come to the fore. Do you also provide advice to commercial debtors? By commercial debtors, are we talking about small businesses? Don't know for the Mr. or Mrs. is anonymous. But yeah, fundamentally, there are issues with small businesses, with self-employed people, small partnerships, where it is very difficult to split the business from the individual, because they are, to all intents and purposes, one and the same. There may be a separate bank account, but that individual's finance is entirely reliant on their window cleaning or whatever business that they have. And we work very closely with a small business advisor. Liz Barclay used to be the chair of MALG. She is now the Small Business Commissioner. And she spoke at our conference last November on this very subject. And it's a really important one because, as I say, it's very difficult to put a line between business and personal debt when you're talking in terms of small owner businesses. Good.
Just quickly, how can we get involved? How can people get involved if they want to?
Have we got application forms with us? No, the answer is please come and have a word. We are, as I say, a not-for-profit membership organisation, and we have different forms of membership. I'm not going to stand here and sell it to you. I think if it's something that you're not involved with and you like the sound of how we operate, for me there are other members in the audience, you know, COEO, United Utilities, who else have we got in the audience? Computer Share. So we've got a good smattering of members who'll probably be able to tell you far better than I can in terms of how they have found it beneficial to get involved with us. But I'm more than happy to have the conversation. We as I say, we're expanding our membership all the time. We're really keen to engage with as many people as possible.
Brilliant.
Good.
Thank you ever so much.
All right.
Bob.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bob Winnington. Thank you very much, Bob. Very enlightening. Certainly some challenges for the debt advisors.